Everybody, welcome to Stu's Wrestling Podcast. This is Thor coming from America. What's up?
You're listening to Stu's Wrestling Podcast. It's time. Your host, Stu Palmer.
A warm welcome to Stu's Wrestling Podcast, and we are back for episode 134, and we head to Canada to speak to the producer and author of SlamWrestling.net, Greg Oliver. Greg has written many wrestling books over the years, and it was great to ask him about the Benoit book that came out 2 months after the tragedy, yet also ice hockey books that he's done. He's come away from wrestling. He did a book with his son on ice hockey too. Greg has been around the business for many years, and it was just an absolute pleasure to get him on. So, without further ado, it is the producer of SlamWrestling.net, a wrestling news site, author of many wrestling books which are out on ECW Press and oliverbooks.ca if you want to get them. It is my guest today from Canada, from Toronto specifically. It is Greg Oliver. Here we go, enjoy. My guest today, all the way from Canada, Toronto. I'm not wearing my Maple Leafs hat today, though, Greg. It is storied writer, journalist, a man who runs SlamWrestling.net as well, a wrestling news website. It is Mr. Greg Oliver on Stu's Wrestling Podcast today, and it's an absolute pleasure to have you on too.
Thanks for having me, Stu. I didn't think I could have got my West Ham shirt on, but good enough. It's nice to be able to join you and the wonders of technology, eh?
Absolutely. Now, you've been synonymous with pro wrestling with the journalistic side. Obviously, you've released books, but I was looking years and years ago in the 80s. You started off with a newsletter, pre-internet, and how did that come about and the genesis of that when you started your writing in wrestling?
It's all about timing, isn't it? We got an Apple IIe computer at my house, and playing around with it, we got a desktop publishing program, and at the time Hulkamania was just starting to run wild, and we toyed around with a newsletter. It was my brother, myself, and my other friend Serge, and we sort of threw it all together, and all of a sudden the wrestling report was launched, and we sold it at the school, and my dad sold a few at the office. Wrestling was hot at the time, and then it just grew from there. And I did the newsletter for 5 years, and I know I got a lot better at it and how to deal with people, how to interview people, how to collect things. But at the time when I started, I had no idea there was a bigger wrestling world out there with, your Wrestling Observer and all the different historians that had done all the research. You just basically only had access to what you saw on TV and you saw the magazines in the stores.
Amazing. I didn't realize how far back you were doing it, to where you are.
I'm
today.
old, yeah.
You're not that old, Greg. You're not that old. Sorry, I have aged you there, haven't I? A little bit, saying about
there you go. It's not the years, it's the
80s.
mileage. Yeah.
Absolutely. What else did you cover? Did you cover regionals? Did you cover the Canada scene as well in the newsletter?
At the beginning, it was mainly WWF because we really didn't understand that there was a lot out there. And then that grew with time, that you started to get some correspondence. You started to realize there was more shows out there. You just started to piece things together, and you started sending notes to, whether it was Tom Burke and his Global Wrestling or Wade Keller and I are basically the same age, and he started his newsletter, The Wrestling Torch, not long after mine. So all those things sort of just add up, and we just kept growing. But our area's expertise was definitely the Canadian guys, especially the wrestlers that were in and around Toronto that I got to know and got to interview. And at the time, there was an attempt by the NWA and Angela Mosca and Milton Ruskin to come back into Toronto. So early on, we got a chance to interview, Road Warrior Animal and Gino Brito and Ivan Koloff. So all these things sort of conspired together, or came together, that we got some early good breaks. And it was a good lesson in journalism, and I definitely got better. I started doing the school newspaper, and then I started working at the local newspaper in Kitchener, Ontario at the same time. So all those things came together, and I eventually went off to journalism school and stopped with the wrestling altogether.
Did you? What were you covering? What were you covering after that? Then what was your genre then? What did you move on to?
I purposely went away from the wrestling at university simply because I wanted to challenge myself, right? And learn some new things and meet new people. And so, your assignment could be everything from, some changing bylaw in the city to going down to the courts to sit through a court, somebody, being on trial, or sometimes you do something that just interests you. I remember doing one about the Monarchist Society of Canada. So there's a good tie into, jolly old England. So, you could write about what you wanted or you get an assignment from somebody, and that was really great. And I thought I was really done with wrestling. I ended up working at the Toronto Sun newspaper and never worked in sports there in my 5 years that I was at the Sun. I worked in lots of other departments and wrote some interesting things over the years, but nothing sports related.
How did wrestling come back in then into your life, into your writing?
Well, it's all about timing, isn't it? The internet took off. I was the right age and I had the right connections to be able to go to my boss and say, when you guys start the website for the Toronto Sun newspaper, I want to go. And he said, sure. So I ended up being one of the first guys at what we called canoe.ca. It was Canadian Online Explorer. And we decided to name the sports section Slam Sports. And we realized we had all this wrestling content because we had access to the Calgary Sun, where Bret Hart's column was. There was a wrestling column in the Ottawa Sun, written by Mr. X, who was the sports editor, Tim Baines. And then the Toronto Sun had a column by Glenn Cole. And so we had all this content and we had to do something with it. So we built a wrestling section, and John Powell was another co-worker. And we sort of realized we both enjoyed pro wrestling. And then, of course, 1997, the Monday Night Wars are just starting to take off. It was the perfect time to be starting a website, and just had access to so much stuff. And again, we were lucky being in Toronto because there was a Toronto office for WWF. And so they would bring guys by the office, like Farouk came by the office and did a live chat. A live chat in 1997 isn't what it is now. And, the Quebecers came by. I can remember meeting lots of people that came through the Sun, whether it was Sonny, Booker T came by the office, like all these guys over the years. It was great fun and a great learning experience, and all that stuff I'd learned through the years. Journalism pays off. It was, that was really what Slam Wrestling was. It stood apart from everybody else, I think. And I think it still does, is we're journalists first who just happen to write about pro wrestling.
It's perfect, man. That's perfect. I'm trying to think as well. Who else did you have the pleasure of interviewing? You named quite a few there. Who else stands out? I bet you're going to tell me there's hundreds. But yeah, just some others that stand out and why they stand out for you.
Well, there's a difference between a phoner and the in-person stuff, right? Like I got to interview Chris Benoit, Chris Jericho, Owen Hart, all those guys on the phone, right? Because we really concentrated on the Canadian wrestlers. Nobody had written about, some of those guys in general. I had done really long interviews with them. They weren't the main stars in WCW at the time, or with Owen, it was great. And that one still rang. I still remember that because he called up and it's like, it's the Blue Blazer. It's like, oh, is it? But from there, the experiences just go nuts, really, if you think about it, because I got involved with things like the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame when it was up in upstate New York, and you could be sitting in the bar with Jack Briscoe. I went to the Cauliflower Club. I've been going there for more than 20 years, and just the wonderful opportunities that have come along there. Wrestlers are just cool guys, and cool girls, and they have interesting stories. But what I found over the years is that when I started covering real sports, sort of again, writing about hockey or this and that, the current players always keep things a little bit under wraps, right? They're not always revealing everything. And it's the same with wrestlers today, right? If you're active with WWF or WWE or AEW, you're going to be a little bit more careful what you say. But the retired people have no filter. So they're a lot more fun to talk to.
Very, very open. Yeah, absolutely. And, it was more guarded. We're not going back, 25, 26 years. It was still guarded to a certain extent, wasn't it? I know, think things were known, but more so today. Am I right in thinking that, or not? Is that the wrong way of looking at it?
Well, yeah, it was guarded, but that's also like the big break you get, right? Is when you get past that door. And, it was like guys like Ricky Johnson, who's the brother of the Rocky Johnson. There's a referee here that was named Wayne Cashman. So those kind of guys started looking out for this teenage Greg Oliver and let you see behind the scenes. And then once you start gaining their trust, that means you might get another phone number. You might get access to something you may not have done otherwise. And you can't write about it all. Like, that's the other thing. You learn your journalism, what you can and can't do. And I'm sure there's so many, again, the wrestling world is so populated with people without the journalistic experience. They would be floored at the things I never wrote about, because you can't, right? It's just, they're off the record. Even just, a year ago, I was at backstage the NWA tapings for a few days because I was working with Medusa on her book, and she's a producer there and an agent. So I wanted to be able to see her work to be able to properly describe it. And so you get to see everything that's going on around you, but you can't report it because you're not there in that aspect. Now there's people I can take aside and do an interview with, and that's different. That's okay. But you can't report about, this malfunction of costumes or whatever it may have been backstage, people fighting, or a surprise visit from an A&E or AEW star that came in and just hung out backstage. Like, that's not my job to do that. You got to keep that trust.
That's nice. It's interesting, man. It's interesting. How else? I'm trying to think of the NWA as well. How was that seeing that? I've not seen over the last 12 months, but when Billy Corgan first started doing it, I was very impressed with it through lockdown, prior to lockdown. But yeah, just your other experiences being backstage at NWA and how that was.
Well, if that one was a special privilege just because I was a little bit higher up the food chain, I guess might be a better way to put it, just because Medusa had a lot of pull, and I was just able to sit there and watch Bill Barron's do all the time, as they're counting down the pay-per-view and how much time they have left and all that. That was a really neat experience. I've been backstage at WWF events, or not TV, but at house shows and things like that, and you're never quite in there quite as much. So that was a real privilege. With Impact, I've done a little bit of that. I've been able to sit backstage and do it, but often it's just you're there to visit friends, right? And maybe to get an interview or two. And that's what wrestling has become for me in a lot of ways. It's like you made a lot of friendships, and these connections pay off down the road. A great example is I can't even remember his name now. Anyways, the point is you talk to somebody at some point, and then years down the road they become a bigger star, and they remember that you took the time back then, and it pays off. And it's the same in real life, right? Your connections for jobs, for anything going forward is reliant on how you deal with people. And I like to think I've been pretty good dealing with people.
Oh, that's cool, man. That's cool. You hear the dark side of the business things, but it's nice to hear you've had good experiences within the business doing what you've been doing, man. Absolutely. Who were some of the guys? I'm going to go back. I'm going to come away from the journalistic side a little bit. Who were some of the guys you liked watching when you were younger?
Well, Roddy Piper, I think, probably made a big impression on me, and I'm hardly alone there. He was just so captivating, right? And you laughed and you were pulled in. You wanted to hear what he was going to say next. All those things that wrestling's supposed to be. But of course, he only works as a heel, or even when he became a good guy, because there's people he's talking about. And if you go back and you listen to what he talks about, he was always so careful to. He was mocking his opponents, but he also was never really putting them down, right? Like, you got to build up. If you're going to beat somebody, they got to be somebody. And that's a little bit lost in today's world, I think, that they forget that. And again, partly because there's so much of the competitiveness that there's trade-offs of wins and losses in today's wrestling, so much that there isn't that continual build. But yeah, Piper I loved. Jimmy Garvin. I used to pretend to be, gorgeous Greggy out in the side. There's a lot of those kind of guys, but you also learn to pick a few favorites, and it's those magic moments going to those indie shows, right? I saw a young Sexton Hardcastle, and I wrote in my notebook, could be good if ceiling was higher. And that, of course, became Edge. So you're privileged to see some of these guys come along, and maybe they were young and you didn't know them, and or their kids get involved. It's been a really fun ride.
Absolutely. Yeah, mad to just see how stratospheric it was for Edge. Just amazing. And then the comeback, 2-3 years ago, after the doctors saying he wouldn't be back. It's amazing. It's amazing to see him back on the show, man.
Absolutely, yeah. No, and it's a little bit makes you feel a little bit out of shape to see these guys like Jericho and Edge, these guys that I've known for a long, long time that are still doing it at their age. And mad props to them. They're amazing guys and continue to reinvent themselves too. That's the other thing. They're not the same old characters as they were when I first met them in the early 90s, mid 90s kind of thing.
Jericho's looked after himself, hasn't he? He's looked after himself. It's just the longevity and to reinvent as well. I know a lot of people obviously say about him reinventing himself, but to still be at the precipice now, and he's early 50s, it's amazing. Absolutely amazing.
It is, but again, it comes down to technology to a degree. I mean, in the 80s, we didn't know quite as much about how to keep yourself in shape and the proper foods and all those different things. And what a workout should change as you get older, right? You're not going to be able to do the same things you did when you're in your 20s. So all those things have been advantageous, I think, to some of these guys to keep going. Now, it's still all on them. They work really hard. I'm not denying that. But it's also, like I said, the world's changed a bit. And we've learned a lot about how your body works. And concussions being another example, right? And neck surgery, all those things would have ended their careers all those years ago. But they're able to keep going because, again, things have changed. We learned how to deal with some of that.
You've been an author for many books. I know a lot of ECW Press, anonymous with wrestling publications over the years. But how did that come to be? What was the genesis of that? Because you've written so many books, and also Map Memories as well, a more recent one, which I've noticed you're involved in that as well. So,
long story short is that Michael Holmes is still the editor at ECW Press and of sort of the nonfiction side of things and wrestling and sports. And he just sort of contacted me out of the blue and said, "You ever thought about doing a book?" And this would have been about 2001. And it just so happened to coincide with not long after. It was like the tech boom, fell apart. And I found myself out of work. So I had the right amount of time to start working on what became the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, the Canadians. And, that did well enough that, Steve Johnson contacted me after he got a copy, said, "I really love this." I got to know Steve Johnson, who's he's about 10 years older than me. So he's done a lot more of the journalism. So I found myself with a little bit of a mentor, but also a guy that I could sort of hold his hand a little bit and get him more involved because I knew the people. Right. I knew the wrestlers and we were able to really work together. And then that became the tag teams. That became the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, the heels, the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame heroes and icons, where we got a little bit of help from Mike Mooneyham. And then we did the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, the Storytellers, which is an incredible book that hasn't gotten the attention it deserves. And that's me totally blowing our own horn. It really is worth everybody seeking out because we really did take a different approach about how wrestlers tell stories and really explore that. But yeah, it's funny sometimes how things come about. I never expected to write a book, let alone have, as of April next year, I'll have like 19 books out. It's nuts. And it's a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun and it's provided some wonderful opportunities. I self-published a book with my son when he was like 6 because he'd be going to these events with me. And he was good at selling. So we created Duck with the Puck, which was a book about his favorite stuffy and wanting to play hockey. And so he could then now sell at these events, when I'm out selling my books, he could go out running around and selling his book. We did a Titans in Toronto dinner and he had just gotten the book. So he went around, I think he sold probably 20 copies, to guys like Ricky Johnson, Sweet Daddy Siki, whoever it was. He would just go up and had no fear, went up and sold a book. So he's now bigger than I am, but times change. He still gets asked about that book occasionally, and that's kind of cute. It's just part of his history, right?
Amazing that you did that together, father and son. That's cool, man. Love that. Absolutely, yeah. That's amazing. That's amazing. Also, I've got to ask you, the book on Benoit as well. It still splits opinion, doesn't it? What happened in 2007 and all that. Yeah, that coming together and doing, the publication on Benoit.
That one was the quickest book that we've ever done. There was 4 of us. It was myself and Steve Johnson, Heath McCoy from out in Calgary, and Irv Muchnick, who's down in California. And it was a very quick book. The murder suicide was in June. The book was done by August, and then on shelves sort of September or October, which is an amazing feat in this day and age. And it sold a ton of books right away because it was true crime. People were interested in it at that time. And then it died off. It didn't sell any. But now when I go out to events, because it's been that much longer, you have people that don't really know a lot about it. So they're curious and they'll pick up the book. It's actually a really good primer. It's not the deep dive that Irv Muchnick did with his Chris and Nancy book. It's more of an overarching thing, and it's very much a time and place. I'm proud of the book, but you also know that if you had more time, it would be a different book. And I know I argued we had to do a section on Nancy. So I ended up writing the section about Woman, who I certainly remember watching a lot on when she was in WCW. But yeah, but that's life, isn't it? I know what I could do now and how much better it would be. But at the time, we had to do something quick, and we did. And it is a difficult subject to broach because Chris Benoit was a guy that was a great performer. I had some personal emails from him that we shared in the book. And, I had a story in the Atlanta Constitutional Journal and the national paper here, the Globe and Mail in Canada. So all these things related to this private stuff that he'd shared with me. So it's a weird world to walk as a journalist, I guess is the best way to put it.
It's crazy. I remember staying at for Raw when Vince turned around. They had to say that they found out what had happened the night before. They weren't sure, were they? And he came out and there would be a raise in Benoit from the records, basically, wasn't it? And even to this day, it's just oh my days. And it was late over in the UK when that aired. I mean, it was like 1 a.m. And I always remember it stays with you, like Vince doing his piece to camera about it. So, yeah, crazy. But what a talent, Greg. In the same token, and that's I got to see him a fair few times over the years, and he was incredible.
Yeah, and that goes for a lot of guys, though, that maybe dark secrets, and again, some of the stuff you can't report, but it means I don't watch them the same way, right? And that goes for older guys like your Jimmy Snuka. Growing up, we thought he was a great talent, but then, in the world before the internet, we didn't really all know about the murder that he committed or allegedly committed or got off on a technology on you know what I mean, on technicality. Because he couldn't stand trial because he wasn't sane or whatever they got him off on in that second late trial or first late trial. Anyways, it was amazing work by Irv Muchnick to bring that all back to us. But it means you can never watch Superfly Snuka stuff again or the same way, right? Without thinking of that. And that's the reality, right? I mean, we hear about, your football players that, have domestic abuse or whatever it may be, right? And it does change your perspective, and we're human beings, and we have to. You question things, and that's only natural.
Did you catch much going back into the 80s? Did you catch much Stampede wrestling? Obviously, I know it was out of Calgary. Did you manage to catch it there in Ontario? Was it televised, to the extent it would have been in other markets? So
it's funny because I keep bringing up the word technology, and that changes everything, right? Once we had cable television, TSN, which was our big national sports channel, they added Stampede Wrestling. And so all of a sudden it was available nationally. And that was a huge game changer certainly for me to be able to watch it. But it's just, you got to see all these talents. But Ed Whalen then, who was the announcer, got another show called Pro Wrestling Plus, where he did highlights of other territories and things like that and talked a little bit about wrestling. and he plugged my newsletter. So I had subscribers across the country because of the goodness of Ed Whalen. So in 1997, when I got to go out to Calgary, I was going to Bret Hart's house to do an interview after the screw job, which is, of course, right around this time, 25 years ago. I actually got to go see Ed Whalen, take him out for coffee, and say thank you in person for all that breaks that he did. I went to the Hart house and sat there with Stu, and he wanted to take me down to the dungeon, but I didn't go down. I went down, but Carl Leduc, who's the son of Paul Leduc, was there and at the time training, and he took the stretching for me. So he always has my love for that.
He's always trying to coax people into the dungeon, wasn't he? Like, I know.
Yeah, I was scrawny. I was even scrawnier then. Now I got a few more pounds on me, but yeah, it's like not like I'm built to beat up anybody.
David Schultz, I've been watching Tales from the Territories that Vice have put out, managed to get hold of it over here. Dr. D said he was trying to coax him in there and he wasn't having any of it. He would try, come on, and he's like, no, not going down there. You know, a man like Dr. D, tough man. He wasn't even going to go down there with Stu Hart. He knew better.
The legacies move on, right? These guys all hear about it and it gets passed around in wrestling. That's certainly a case where there's a lot of gossip in wrestling, a lot of stuff that gets talked about, and that would be one that everybody knew not to go down there. But you also, I mean, wrestling's such a macho thing, right? So you want to test yourself. You want to go down there and see if you can survive and not scream and cry.
Even into his 70s, you know, in his 80s, he was still still doing it. It's mad. It's crazy. It's crazy. Do you get a chance? Have you seen The Dark Side of the Ring? Obviously, I know that was like from 2019. What do you feel that those guys have done and the way they've portrayed it, the way they produced that show?
I've watched most of them. They hired me as a consultant on the Johnny Canine episode. Canine was a guy I knew really well, and again, we talked about people who let you behind the scenes. He was one of them. I actually did his program for his wrestling shows that he did. When he got out of jail once, the one interview he did was with me. So we had a long history, and I went to his funeral. So they hired me to help with some pictures and some things there. So it's a little bit tough for me to comment exactly on Dark Side because there is that like a little bit of conflict of interest, a little bit. They do an interesting job, but it's also really hard to tell some of these stories in an hour. And telling a story visually is different than telling a story the way I do it on Slam or in a book, where you can write things and put in the background and try to really fill in those holes. Whereas in a narrative on a screen, they often have to jump, especially in an hour program. I got to work with the people that put together the Sweet Daddy Siki documentary. And
seen it. Yeah.
Technically, I'm the writer of it. But, a documentary doesn't really have a writer. You're there to hold their hand and make sure everything goes good. And again, there's a lot of things left out. You had to, right? And there's maybe things I didn't necessarily agree with. They did the aside on the bear. And it's like, to me, it didn't need to be there. I would have had more on Siki. But, I wasn't the director. I was just involved in the project. So I love that aspect. And that makes me respect some of the choices they have to make on any of these documentaries. Whether it's the Dark Side people or the Tales of the Territory, or whether it's, any documentary that's out there, they have to make choices about what they're going to include. And it makes you wonder sometimes what's left on the side, isn't it?
People are critical of the latest thing, Tales from the Territories, again, saying it's too in and out and they're jumping from subject matter to subject matter. I like it, and I like the round table aspect. The Memphis episode got two shows. I think some of them maybe did deserve two shows as well. The CWF one, the Stampede one, definitely. I think they could have done 2 episodes, but I liked it. I enjoyed it, but it is very, very quick. It's very in and out. But I enjoyed it. I've got to be fair. I did enjoy it.
I also enjoy the aspect of the reenactments, because a lot of people may sort of think they're kind of hokey and maybe not all that good, but to me, there's so many of the indie guys that wrestle in and around Toronto that are getting these opportunities to do these things. It makes it really fun. It's like, didn't I just see you and you were dressed up as Road Warrior Hawk or whatever? It makes it really fun.
That's cool. Yeah, hey, it's a payday for them guys as well. To be fair, you can't knock that. You got to take the jobs. Definitely, yeah, absolutely.
Good point. Yeah, no, they haven't asked me to do anything yet, but then I have a face for radio. So what are you gonna do?
Now I'm going to move on to soccer football because before in the intro, just prior to the intro, you said you're a West Ham fan. Now, how did that come about? How did you start following the Hammers? I'd love to hear about that because I'm a big soccer football fan, obviously being from the UK, from Wales.
Okay, well, I've got to clarify though that I'm not a huge soccer fan. I don't watch a ton of it. I played it growing up. I coached it here for 20 years. And so when I went to England to visit one of my best friends growing up, her then fiance, basically traded me a West Ham shirt I brought him one of my like local soccer shirts, right? Like this was like it was like a coaching shirt for West Toronto Soccer Club. So, he had a really unique shirt and I had a really unique shirt. It was a neat thing. And I really love, soccer, and I'll get up for like the European Championships and the upcoming World Cup. But of course, with Canada finally in there again.
Absolutely.
So I've always enjoyed soccer, and watching the Canadian women really succeed has been awesome. But yeah, I never find enough time to watch certainly the European or the British soccer. I can't say I'm a huge Hammers fan. I have a Hammers shirt. A bit of a difference, You got to pick and choose what you're going to watch, right? For me, it's like Canadian football. We're going to a game on Sunday to watch Toronto Argonauts. We'll go watch Cleveland Browns NFL games. Like, you got to pick and choose. You can't spend your whole day watching.
It's impossible. It's impossible.
You can, but you shouldn't.
Yeah. There's not enough hours in the day, or either that or you'd be jobless and you'd be able to. Yeah, and with it, it's just so much. There's just so much out there. It's crazy. It's a time constraints with everything, isn't it? Like you say.
Yeah, well, and you grew up in a world where there was a feature game of the week, and now there's like you can watch any game you want, anytime you want. It's a wonderful thing, but it's also a real scary thing, I guess.
Well, Wales are in it for the first time since 1958, the World Cup. They obviously qualified for the last two Euros. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting because we've got Gareth Bale and we've got Ramsey. Like, they're coming to the end. But, yeah, it'll be interesting. I'm looking forward to the World Cup. I really am. But, yeah, yes, we shall see.
Absolutely, yeah, and you got to schedule your breakfast or whatever time the games are on. It's like then it's okay to have your lunch in front of the screen. That's okay. You can have it on in the background, kind of thing. Absolutely. Especially when Canada's going to play. You
got some good. Got a couple of good lads actually. I know
Jonathan Davies for sure.
Jonathan Davies getting highly touted a lot. I know a lot of the Premier League clubs are looking at him, and with good reason. And the fullback for Bayern Munich, his name eludes me. He's been at Bayern Munich. He's been in Germany, playing at the top level as well. The name's gone. I can't think of his name. Okay. It might come to. I don't want to. I'm knocking time down here, and I know time is of the essence. So yeah,
we'll be deep diving into the World Cup later. But yeah, as far as wrestling, there's not a lot of soccer wrestling tie-ins. That's the funny thing. I mean, other than Paul Diamond, who ended up in the AWA and was briefly in the WWF there as what was he, Max Moon? He was a goalie in the NASL.
Yes.
So Tampa Bay Rowdies.
That's it. Absolutely. Greg, events, moments that you've been in attendance for, and I'm sure you've been to a lot of shows, fan perspective now, coming away from the journalistic side, and like when you've been in attendance, just like some standout matches that you've been to, events over the years. I know it's hard. I'm pigeonholing you here.
Yeah, well, okay. I always have said, and I've been able to tell all these guys in person at some point, my favorite match I ever saw was part of the Great American Bash Tour in 1988. It was the Midnight Express with Jim Cornette against Arnon Tully with J.J. Dillon. And so, yeah, like, as I said, I've been able to meet most of these guys along the way and say, I really love that match. It really stands out with me. But, being there when Edge won his first Intercontinental title at Skydome in Toronto, being at a number of WrestleManias, again, they're different memories, though. Like, things that stick with you aren't necessarily what a fan gets, because let's say Anaheim pawned for WrestleMania 2000, they didn't turn on the Wi-Fi. So we had to go file my story to a national newspaper chain across Canada when they had to go find somebody who worked at the pond to turn on their computer. I had to put it on my floppy disk, put it in their computer. They turned on their Wi-Fi or whatever, and then I was able to file it to a national newspaper chain. So WWF has come a long way, WWE, and how media is, because the world's changed, right? People are now tweeting immediately during the shows. So that's like the kind of moments that really stand out for me from some of these events that a fan never, it's a different than a fan experience when you're there. And I often can't turn it off and just be a fan. And that's maybe a little bit sad, but it's the reality.
Absolutely. Yeah, I bet, were you worried about that with the lack of technology? Did that worry you, getting that story out, or were you panicked or anything? Just like from your perspective?
Panicked is a small part of it, yeah. But you also the WWE, PR people had to step up and help, right? It's like, you invited me down here. I'm here at the show. I need to do this. You want publicity, right? That's how it works. So there's an expectation there that they had to help come through, and that's happened other times too. Just little things that the PR people at the different companies have to do. They're definitely unheralded. And they help move the machine in the background a lot, and they're not always out there for the publicity, and that kudos to all those guys and women in the PR world for sure.
See, we consume all this, but we don't realize all the cogs. Like you saying and making references on there, we consume it, don't we? But sometimes oh yeah, that's the writer, and that's as far as it goes, isn't it? I've read his work, like you said. No, it's a good perspective. That good way of looking at it.
Yeah, you don't know that I chased this guy for 6 months to finally get that interview, right? And then sometimes they come together quickly. It's and sometimes you only want something very specific, and I just interviewed Steve Macklin from Impact Wrestling. Yeah. Because on slamwrestling.net, we always do a Remembrance Day story, or Veterans Day, as they call it in the US. And he served, in the US Marines. So I wanted to talk to him about that. So we didn't go a deep dive into his career. We really focused a lot on that. And that's what I chose to do. And a lot of people are puzzled by that, but it's like, no, I don't want to do the deep dive, right? I'd rather do something special sometimes and something that'll stand out.
Absolutely. Who would you like to interview that you haven't had the chance to? Is there anybody on the list?
That's a good question. There aren't many guys I haven't interviewed. I've never interviewed Shawn Michaels or The Undertaker. Would be probably two of the biggest names out there that I've never talked to. I mean, I've interviewed Flair and Hogan and Brett and you name them, and sometimes there's just that special moment. Like I remember walking beside Big Show and asking him, we were interviewing and walking at the same time. And so you're walking fast because you have big legs, but it's like, what's the difference between this world championship reign and, in WCW? And he sort of stopped and goes, that's a really great question. And, that talks about the leadership and the change and, being forefront of a different kind of company. So those are, like I said, special moments that a journalist, when you get those moments, and it's happened lots of times, not just in wrestling, that means you've done your job.
Absolutely. The Big Show, man. How big was he?
He's a big dude.
Yeah, massive hands. Crazy, just crazy. Unbelievable. Yeah. That was a bit. I'm just thinking, you've interviewed so many people. How was Flair? Was that in person?
It was, yeah.
With Flair, yeah.
Yeah. It was a bit of a scrum, but I'm really good at, asking questions, and that gets his attention, right? Like, and a good question, not just, something real markish. When they have to stop and think and they look at you in the eye, they know, you got them. And Hogan was the same way. He was like, he was really into the questions because they're different kind of questions. And even the other day, one of my writers, Bob Kapoor, talked to Billy Corrigan, and at the end, Billy said something along the lines of, thank you for the really intelligent adult conversation. It's like, you don't often get that from so many of these people that maybe aren't trained journalists.
I respect you guys because I couldn't write. I do, honestly. Pro Wrestling Stories is another one. I've had a few guys on from there. I really do appreciate you guys that can write about these things and the depth I'd merely be scratching the surface. But like you guys, it's such a talent, and I know you've done it for a number of years. But it's just amazing. Like it's so cool what you guys can do, and the publications that have come out, and the depth of stuff, man. Absolutely.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's been interesting. Are we going again?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, sorry. Okay,
yeah. Just your thoughts on that. What I've just said. Yeah, if possible.
It's a talent to write. It's a talent to edit, and it's a talent to know what needs to be out there and what should be out there and when it should be out there. So there's all those elements of things. And the internet sped up everything, of course, but that doesn't mean that good journalism doesn't matter. And we've decided that over the years at Slam, that just because the story may not get a ton of traffic doesn't mean it shouldn't be done. And, you do stories for different reasons. You interview people for different reasons. All those pieces add up to a greater picture. And slamwrestling.net is one of the few places out there that's been around 25 years, a little bit longer than that, and has this incredible deep archive of all these interviews, all these people we've talked to over the years that we can then reference and people can do really deep dives to. And if you look at Google, and if you look at Wikipedia and all those things, we're hugely referenced, and that's a really good feeling. And it means that our stories have made a lasting impression, and that they continue to be a part of the wrestling history, the wrestling narrative. Because I've often said, it's like if you run an event and nobody reports on it, did it really happen? And now that's obviously, you can't cover every indie show in the world. But if there's a big event like a Cauliflower Alley Club or a Hall of Fame induction or something along those lines, to me, they need to be covered. And it's a journalistic moment that we try to put priorities on.
I've got one last question. Now, if you could write on any subject within wrestling, if you could put a book out, what would you like to do a book on? That would be my closing question. And I know you've done a lot. I know you've had a lot of publications out, but yeah, a subject matter within wrestling, or or a person maybe. It's just quite a broad question. That
exactly. It's like I've probably worked on a lot more things than people even realize. Like even like Bill Apter, like I held his hand to do his book, and because I knew he had a great story, and Bill did a great job, and he did all the writing. But I definitely, was his editor, his coach, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, so I've been asked that question a few times, and like I never thought I would have enjoyed doing Medusa's book as much as I did. And Deb Michelli's an amazing person, a wonderful friend now, but what a story. And that's coming out in April, late March, early April. But finding her voice and being able to telling it was a real challenge. So related to that, though, the one person out there that story really needs to be told, I think, is CM Punk's. So, if you're out there and you're listening, Phil, I'll just give me a call. We'll figure this out. Your book needs to be told. I don't know who else is out there on that level that would have that kind of interest, that cross level thing. Punk's a big hockey fan too, so we can bond over that. I don't think I've ever interviewed him. We've interviewed him for the site plenty of times, but I don't think I ever did. When we go back to our question about who I never interviewed.
I thought it was a work with AEW recently, the kickoff backstage and all that went on. Initially, I was like, they're working this into an angle. Lo and behold, it's the truth, isn't it? There's been a lot of accounts. So yeah, I just wonder, never say never that he'd return to WWE, because Triple H has had people back, Vince has had people back. You can never say never, can you? And if it makes money, Greg.
But isn't that the whole nature of being a wrestling fan, though, is that you often question immediately things are at work, and that goes to real life too. It's like, somebody's giving you a tough time. Are they working me, or is this real? Like, what's going on here? You wonder about, the big transactions when somebody leaves West Ham and goes somewhere else, right? It's like, what's going on? What's the work behind the scenes? Oh my God. And you never hear those things about how the guy slept with somebody else's wife and that's why he got traded, or the things you can't necessarily report on.
Absolutely. Greg, in terms of social media, obviously the website for Slam Wrestling, where people can find your content, also where the books, where your authored books can be found as well. Before we go, and your social media, please.
Yeah, it feels so egotistical sometimes to do all the plugs, but I appreciate it, Stu. Slamwrestling.net is our home, and oliverbooks.ca is the home for all my books, all the different things that are out there. Oliverbooks.ca, and then most of my socials are under Greg Mep, GREGMEP. But I mean, you can find everything from my website, the oliverbooks.ca, including the book I did with my kid.
Amazing.
Lots of different things in there, the wrestling, the hockey books. There's a baseball book coming out with a baseball manager next spring too. It's been a very busy time. I'm not 100% sure what's next, but that's part of the fun. You know, you don't know, right?
Absolutely. My guest today, all the way from Canada, the third Canadian guest on the show. And this is episode 134 now, Stu's Wrestling Podcast. TJ Wilson and then Jeremy Prophet as well. So yeah, you're the third, Greg. You're the third Canadian. I need to get more Canadians on the show.
Oh, I do know a few. Yeah, there's some pretty good ones.
Absolutely. Yeah. My guest today is author, producer of SlamWrestling.net that has been around for so many years. Journalism, fantastic Greg Oliver. A pleasure having you on Stu's Wrestling Podcast today, sir.
Thank you so much. Have a great one.
A big thank you to Greg Oliver there. It was great getting some insight. I love writers, journalists within the business of wrestling. What they are able to do is fantastic. I couldn't do it, that's for sure. But yeah, a fantastic guest. Great insight. He's been around the business for so long and so well respected. And coming away from wrestling as well, you know, he wrote for newspapers in Canada. So he's done an awful lot in journalism. So I look up to Greg, and it was an honour to get him on. Thank you so much.